Yogah Karmasu Kaushalam.
In this part, we will be talking about the framework of materials development along with the process of materials development. The primary consideration to be taken into account while designing materials is a threefold concept of realizations. It can be represented in a form of a diagram which shows the linguistic exploration, pedagogical realization, contextual realization. Materials development works in the background of these. The first consideration that a teacher needs to make is that of looking at what language functions are needed to be taught. This has been done in relation to the curriculum and the syllabus at hand. The teacher must then unearth the language units related to the topic and must include the same in the materials development. Second consideration is the contextual realization, which means that the materials developed or used in the classroom should be within the cultural boundaries of the students and should cater to the known cultural experiences rather than causing an impediment by making it an alien experience. The last consideration is to be understood as pedagogical realization, which refers to the designing of such materials which provide meaningful practice which need of the language learning. Efficient and effective writing of instructions, including proper usage of meta-language, are all part of pedagogical realizations. Material providers use a simple yet dynamic stepwise process of producing language learning material. The structured movement from one step to the other can help the teachers develop material that will work well with all the considerations mentioned above. The process can then be explained through the following figure. First is the identification by the teacher or the learners of a need to fulfill or a problem to solve by the creation of material. Second is the exploration of the area of the problem, the area of the need, of what language, what meanings, what function, what skills, etc. are to be taught. Contextual realization of the materials of the proposed new materials by finding a suitable ideas, context or text with which to work. Pedagogical realization of materials is finding of appropriate exercises and activities and the writing of appropriate instruction for the use. Production of materials involving consideration of layout, type, size, visuals, reproduction, tape, length, etc. Generally, materials developers move in this particular direction from identification of needs to their final use. However, they may or may not use all the steps identified in the figure. The simplicity of this model does become a constraint for many publishers. One directional simplicity of this model, however, may be what makes so many published materials lack the final touch of excellence. The fact is that the uniqueness of the material is not the production of the same, but it is the finesse used by the teachers to modify the content for their particular classrooms. So this linear model fails to illustrate the extent to which the materials writing can be a dynamic and a self-adjusting process. The primary concern is that by ending with classroom, it equates materials production and use of materials with effective meeting of the needs. However, it fails to include the aspect of evaluation of materials used. The act of evaluation turns the process into a dynamic one since it enforces the stakeholders to evaluate whether they have met the objectives or not. Additionally, if there is a failure to meet objectives, it can only be attributed to the inappropriate use of adequate materials. The second concern in following such a linear model of materials production is that the human mind does not work in a linear fashion while trying to find solutions to the problems. While trying to decide on what form of language exercise to be used in the classroom, we may generate spontaneous and multiple second thoughts along with the thoughts about contextualization and so on. Hence, it is needed that while thinking of materials development, we also imagine a variety of optional pathways and multiple feedback loops which make the whole process both dynamic and self-regulating. This may offer more insight why failures of language materials and provide clues to their improvement, both during the writing and after their use. These issues are addressed better when the linear model is changed into a model which provides optional pathways and feedback loops. This has been described in the figure: identification of a need for materials development, exploration of the need, contextual realization of the materials, pedagogical realization of the materials, production of materials, students' use of materials, and evaluation of the materials against the agreed objectives. This particular diagram presents a dynamic method of developing materials by accepting a feedback loop which feeds into the designing of the material and then their subsequent impact. An example can be taken here to explain each step, how it interacts with the other steps. For example, identification of a need. In a reading text, students come across a sentence: "It's time the government listened more carefully to the citizens." They are confused between the past form and the actual meaning of the verb listened. They ask for an explanation. Comes the second stage, exploration of the language. Now, the teacher ensures to address the queries and consult the grammar book on the fact, hypothesis, and neutrality. "It's time" is one of the several expressions involving hypothesis. Comes contextual realization. Teacher decides to produce worksheets on hypothesis meaning to drill the concept and related language practice. It is also decided to give worksheets and tap into the student's personal experience. These worksheets are to reinforce classroom teaching, and hence she or he uses their own names and the students' names maybe for the local references. Then comes the pedagogical realization. The teacher decides on the contrastive approach, fact versus hypothesis initially, with an exercise focusing on the distinction and on the verb forms involved. Enough examples are provided to establish a code to work from. Once basic notions are recognized, communicative functions of sentences involving hypothetical meaning are elicited. Focus is on hidden meaning and the speaker's attitude. Then comes the physical production. That is, the photocopied worksheets are distributed to the learners. Introduction in class followed by completion of worksheet at home and checking in the subsequent class. And lastly comes the evaluation. Students' comments and difficulties with worksheets, examples. There is a fact in hypothesis and the sentences. It is confusing. This will send the teacher back to the pedagogical realization and lead to the change in the instructions and its underlayings. Students may come up with nuances in the materials which the teacher might have overlooked. This can be inculcated whether the class has enjoyed the contextualization through names or not, can be evaluated at this stage. This brings us to the end of part 2. Part 3 will consist of key takeaways from the process.